thank you for that very warm welcome. I'm particularly relieved to be speaking with you all today because, well, I've had a bit of a week. It's been a bit of a stressful week because, you see, I've had my very first brush with cancel culture, but luckily I seem to have made it out of the other side. You see, I was put on blast this week by social media star and darling of the left-wing media, Hannah Ferguson. So she called me an extreme right-wing advocate, and Abby Chatfield, her lefty mate, then jumped online to say how revolting a piece I wrote was. See, the left weren't happy with me, you see, because of a piece that I wrote for the Australian Financial Review. And I started the piece with this line. I said, according to his critics, Charlie Kirk was not assassinated when he was shot in front of 3,000 people at Utah Valley University. He committed suicide. To back this up, I quoted Hannah Ferguson, who, in response to the news of Charlie Kirk's murder, wrote on her Instagram, do I believe that he empowered the violence that ended his life? Yes. And then she said, is violence sometimes necessary? Yes. She wrote that she didn't think she should have to make a choice between celebrating Kirk's death or condemning it, because the conversation apparently is more nuanced than that. Oh, what a time we are living in, when condemning a public execution of an innocent man in front of his wife and 2 children is seen as a morally challenging decision to make. The broader point that I was arguing in this piece was that the left will now try to spin the narrative to paint a picture of a man whose words amounted to so much hatred that it justified their use of violence against him. I wrote, his opponents pretended to be shocked by the things he said. In reality, they were far more shocked by the number of people listening to him and by the number of people who actually agreed with him. You see, his opponents did not see Kirk as a danger because of a handful of misrepresented statements. They saw him as a danger because he was dismantling their cultural monopoly. Charlie Kirk's legacy will be the armies of young people all over the world, young people like me, who now feel brave enough to speak out and fight for their values. And we must continue this fight, unintimidated by the relentless attacks by those on the left to divide and silence us, because the attempts to silence voices on the centre-right are relentless, and it isn't just coming from the outspoken, callous radicals on social media. These attempts are coming from within our institutions. Just recently, the Institute of Public Affairs and other groups on the centre-right have been pulled into a parliamentary inquiry into misinformation and disinformation as it relates to climate change and energy. According to those leading this inquiry, opposition to the rollout of alternative energy infrastructure, such as wind and solar factories and transmission lines, and the concern about their impact is created both externally and artificially. Therefore, the concerns that we've shared based on our dozens of visits to regional communities are not real concerns of real farmers, no, but rather misinformation shared by institutions like the IPA that seek to impose a political narrative. Now, apart from being blatantly untrue, this is a calculated political move. There are many holes in the policies implemented in order to meet net zero emissions by 2050. And there are many facts to support why the transition A can't happen and B, why it won't happen. The numbers don't stack up when it comes to the costings. There is serious and legitimate doubt as to whether our power grid can actually function the way we need it to. And then there's the question as to, well, what is it all for at the end of the day if we only contribute to 1% of global emissions anyway? And these facts are all very, very important. However, one of the cardinal rules of political campaigning is people vote on feelings, not facts. Facts are needed to build a case and influence public opinion, but unless you can make a voter feel a certain way, unless you can make them feel like they should vote for or against a certain policy, then that groundwork that was laid with facts is lost. And this is why the conversation around climate policies has become so difficult, and why the left has built such a strong base of support, because the public has been sold this narrative that we have a moral imperative to tackle climate change, that it must be pursued at any cost, because if we don't, we are betraying our duty to preserve the planet for future generations. Now, because I have both the blessing and the curse of being young, my Instagram algorithm automatically assumes that as a young woman living in inner city Melbourne, that I must want to receive political content from social media influencers like radical left-wing Greens ambassador Abby Chatfield. You know, the same Abby Chatfield that Albo just loves to sit down with and have a chat with on her podcast. Now, recently, my Instagram fed me a video of hers where she aired her feelings about wanting to have children, but expressing that this is a difficult decision to morally justify, because bringing children into the world at the beginning of the climate crisis is a concern. And she says, these are her words, not mine, "We only have a max of 100 years left until things are completely done." She said, "We can't have a kid when the climate is collapsing around us. I'm looking at the weather right now. This isn't normal." Now, this is where a lot of our young people are receiving their news. This is what they're being sold. However, I'm sure Abby Chatfield isn't going to be pulled in front of the misinformation inquiry. So when you turn to a young person or any Australian that has this idea drilled into them that they shouldn't even have children because the earth might collapse whilst they're living on it, then you can see where the discussion around costs and practicality kind of fall flat with them. The answer will always be, well, we need to at least try at any cost because it is our moral duty. This cohort will always vote in support of net zero because they've been made to feel like they're the good guys for doing so. This effectively gives Labor, the Greens and the Teals a home run when it comes to climate policy. They can run this however they want, at whatever cost, so long as it falls under this umbrella of doing the right thing, not just for our country, but apparently for the existence of mankind. But the truth is, the cost of net zero is very real. And these costs are not only fiscal, but they are human. There is a very real human cost of net zero. And when you visit, speak, and work with the communities that will be affected by net zero, when you understand the lived reality, you can no longer feel that this commitment is the right thing to do. And people vote on feelings, not facts. That is why this parliamentary inquiry is adamant on creating a narrative that this human cost is not real. Those politically in favour of the rollout of renewables will try and tell you that opposition from regional communities is not organic, that our farmers aren't wearing the cost. But at the IPA, we've actually been there. We've been with these communities, and this is the human experience of the so-called transition. And I'll give you a heads up. This isn't a transition, it's a demolition. Now, transmission lines are the critical piece of infrastructre that's required to connect wind and solar factories that are constructed out in our regions to the power grid. This construction requires a 70-metre wide swathe cut through farming land and towers as tall as 80 metres high. Contrary to what is being sold by advocates, you cannot farm around these things. There are limitations on what sort of crops can be planted, as well as height restrictions on essential irrigation equipment, as well as machinery. Aerial spraying cannot be carried out at all, and this obstructs pesticide and fertiliser application, crucial for crop management. The reality is, industrial-scale wind, solar, and transmission projects destroy productive land that all Australians rely upon for food security, land that underpins our export markets. And in Victoria, the government knows this. In fact, their very own 2022 policy paper, which I might add has now been conveniently deleted, admitted that up to 70% of Victoria's agricultural land may need to be converted to renewable energy sites. 70%. This is not coexistence, this is demolition. And perhaps most concerning of all are the risks this infrastructure poses to local lives. We asked one of our farmer friends, Bill Baldwin, who we met with out on his farm, about the fire risk posed by infrastructure, and he said to us, "As a CFA member, I don't think it's safe at all to take myself or the crew underneath these things or around these things to fight a fire, because it is too dangerous. It can kill you." His neighbour, Will McIntyre, said, "If the CFA can't fight fires around these things, which they can't, farming is going to become impossible. The risk of fire is huge. At the end of the day, the majority of us are volunteers, so it's hard to justify risking your own life when these are things that we do not want and we do not need." With the facts laid out, it is easy to see why regional communities are furious with what the inner city elite are trying to do to them. This is why most are fighting back to block access to their land. Advocates will say that they're consulting with these landholders, compromising and compensating to reach a middle ground of mutual benefit. This is not true. Farming communities told us stories of bullying, harassment, intimidation by affiliated companies, stories of widows being targeted because they're easier to get on side, neighbour pitted against neighbour, and police being called on farmers who question why an intruder is surveying their land in the middle of the night. In Victoria, because the Allen government knows they will never win community support, they have resorted to brute force. When farmers say no, the government's answer is not negotiation, it's legislation. Victoria has passed the most draconian land access laws in the nation. Under new legislation, government-appointed authorised officers can now march onto private land without consent and even use force against our farmers to construct transmission infrastructure. Any landholder who stands in their way, or even any landholder who doesn't facilitate access, will be hit with fines amounting to thousands of dollars. The Allen government's proposals are more invasive and more authoritarian than anything seen in any other state. And why? Because the government has failed utterly to bring the community with it. And so, here comes the legislative steamroller. This is the reality of the rollout. This is the human cost. One of the tactics used by advocates is to downplay the volume of opposition, or in the instance of this parliamentary inquiry, simply argue that it isn't real. That the anecdotes I've told you about today have been made up by groups like the IPA. And this isn't true. That is why the IPA is soon to launch a new project that we've been working on, a database that tracks and maps every community that has either opposed wind, solar, or transmission lines to dismantle this lie that opposition is rare or isolated. Because when you map these communities, you see something extraordinary that begins to form. A wall of grassroots resistance forming around the inner cities, a wall built by farmers, families, and regional Australians who refuse to be silenced. It shows that this resistance is real, it is organised, and it is growing. And anyone who wants to push forward with these harmful policies will have to push through this wall. As you have seen on signs all around the event this weekend, values matter. Well, the value of sticking up for your neighbours matter. It doesn't matter that your neighbour is hundreds of kilometres away in a country town. These towns are under attack, and the front line of the battle of the net zero war that the inner city elites and the political class are waging on mainstream Australians. It is time to stand up. As mainstream Australians, we have to say once and for all that enough is enough. No more. Stop destroying our country. Because the truth is that when we stand up for our values, we win. We saw it with The Voice, and we will do it again with net zero. So join the IPA in showing our regional and rural communities that we are on their side. It's time to end net zero once and for all and get Australia back on the path to prosperity. Thank you.